Imari Williams here, and you're listening to Geekcast Radio Network.
She loved her job, never was gonna quit. Check the bathroom mirror, fix her lipstick. But Bobby didn't read no number, she was just a kid.
Hello and welcome to the Comic Concierge Podcast, a podcast that believes that comics are for everyone. The key is finding the right one. This is one of my weekly wrap-up episodes where I go through the week that was in comics, give you my thoughts and opinions on some of the most notable issues that came out. Some slight spoilers as I do get into some detail. I will try to avoid the major surprises. But if you want to know absolutely nothing about your books, check the show notes where I'll list all the comic books I'll be talking about today and timestamp so you can skip anyone that you are worried about before you read it. I do start each week with my recommendation of the week, and my recommendation of the week is a little bit different. It's not necessarily the best book I read that week, but the best starting point, the best book if you're going into the store and you have a book you want to read, but you're not sure what, and it's a book that you can read without reading what came before or in some cases what came after. In this case, I'm actually going with Batman number 48. Yes, I know everyone knows that we're all building up to the wedding in Batman number 50. We've had a lot of different prelude issues and things of that nature, all kind of showing how all the different characters have been impacted by the idea of Batman and Catwoman getting married. Well, one of the key people in all of that, of course, is Joker. And we got a little bit of this story in the DC Nation Zero, where Joker was looking for his invitation for the wedding that unfortunately never came. So I would highly advise reading that story, although you don't need it in order to understand this one. It's again, simply Joker. He's found out that Batman is getting married, and he's kind of distraught over the fact that he wasn't told about it, really. And I think obviously there's a large amount of jealousy there, of course. And I've been enjoying Tom King's run on Batman a great deal. His last arc, the Booster Gold arc, I thought was okay. I felt like it probably would have been stronger if that was maybe even a one-shot. It just, especially the way it was framed and the ending of it, I think would have been a little bit more impactful if that wasn't a 3-story arc. But this, I thought, was one of the better issues they've had in some time. And I think he's really great at writing Joker. And there's been a lot of different interpretations of Joker, how to approach him. And I think what's interesting about him in the way that King writes him, he is very obviously unpredictable. There is just this this craziness to him that you would expect for a character like Joker. That's that's what makes him such a great villain, especially with Batman, as Batman is a man of control and wanting to have as much understanding of something as he can, where the Joker just basically subverts that every possible way. Here, he is sadistic, he is violent, he is unhinged, and it even begins with a rather brutal opening. It's an opening that I think was somewhat tasteful, but it did take me back a little bit. Like, there was a large amount of violence in this opening few pages. This is not a Joker that holds back. This is a Joker that is willingly killing a lot of people innocently. He goes into this church, and there's a wedding going on, and basically he's killing all the different people, sometimes by accident, maybe, who knows, Joker, even if an accident is an accident, but it's just a back and forth between him and Batman. And if you've not read any of Tom King's work before this, or if you've never read a Batman book, this to me just surmises what's so great about the relationship, why Joker and Batman are looked at as one of the best arch rivals or rivalries in all of fiction, really. And because there's something just intriguing about their relationship. They do complete one another in a way, and how much affection in an odd way Joker has for Batman. There's some just interesting scenes here and there. He understands Batman in a way I think no one else can, and I think that fact scares Batman, or something that Batman doesn't even want to admit in a way. And what I always found interesting about the relationship between Batman and the Joker is that how the Joker is able to hold his own against Batman, right? Batman is this samurai. He's one of the most well-trained fighters in history. Yet Joker, who's by all means not the most athletic man ever, he certainly can hold his own, I guess, seems to be able to get the upper hand here and there. And I think it's a lot of that is because of that relationship and him being able to find holes in his logic where others can't. And this one, it's a lot more straightforward than that, though. It's simply he has guns and he's not afraid to use them, and he also knows the lines that Batman won't cross and why he will. And if it's taking hostages, if it's killing life, if it's killing himself, he'll do it in order to get what he wants. So I found this really intriguing, just the way that Joker was written. I liked what Tom King did with Joker in the past Jokes and Riddle storyline, though we didn't get a huge amount. This, to me, just, I don't know, there's a little bit more seasoned here. This is where the relationship has much more developed a lot more. And I don't know, one of the moments that really stuck with me is you see Joker near an altar, and he has that gun pointed to himself to try to control Batman. And you see like Joker and Batman just sitting, kneeling, and praying. It's just in a church. It's just an odd image that, I don't know, I found the storytelling on that panel just quite captivating in what it was doing. And I know there's been a lot of controversy. I don't know if controversy is the right word, but some people who have hated Tom King's run for whatever reason. I think this might be one that I don't see anyone really hating this. Maybe some people wouldn't like it as much as I did, but I think the reason I picked this as pick of the week is because it's a good point to jump in right now, especially with issue 50, probably going to be one of the biggest books of the year. If you wanted to try to find a good lean-in point, this is a good reason to do that. You don't need to really know much anything else. It doesn't tie into a lot of Batman's history. Catwoman is kind of in this. I don't want to give any spoilers, but it's mostly just Batman and Joker talking. And that's what Tom King, I think, does best. His dialogue, his ability to kind of demonstrate the psychotic. He can get dark and twisted. We saw that with the Vision, with Mr. Miracle. He knows how to really find ways to depict craziness in fun and interesting ways, and that's on display here. So I'm liking too that he hasn't used the Joker all that much. I thought Scott Snyder maybe did it. He went to Joker as well far too often, and then we had also the 3 Joker thing that went on. I feel like Tom King has just been peppering in really villains here and there, which makes their presence to me mean all that more. So that's why I made my recommendation of the week. It's one of the strongest issues that I think King has put out in some time. Maybe since the Annual. It's probably my favorite King comic of Batman since the Batman Annual, which I would probably say is maybe his best work. But I was curious to see what people had to think about this. And if people out there are excited for The Wedding, as another, as that will be released, I believe, on the 4th of July, which is being built up as one of the biggest comic book days in some time. We're getting a new Captain America then. I think that's also when the Catwoman series debuts, which I am super excited for because that's going to be done by Joel Jones. But that's pretty much it for this book. So let's move on to the next title. The other book that was almost recommendation of the week was The Sword Daughter #1 by Brian Wood and or by Mac Chater. And I really enjoyed the series overall. It's about a father and daughter who are alive. It's year 991, like right in the early 1st century. And it begins where we see them in their village when the daughter's very young is attacked. And pretty much everyone is murdered and killed except for the father and her daughter. And then after that, he is basically left nearly comatose for nearly a decade. The daughter is basically sent to defend for herself. He eventually wakes up, and now that he's woken up, he hopes to enact revenge to these people that killed everyone he knew. And it indicates that he was asleep, but considering the terminology at the time, I'm guessing there was, I'm not sure, some sort of depression or something of that nature, where he was just detached from reality. It seems like during that time, his daughter was the one taking care of him, and they do have an interesting relationship, and the fact that he wants to go about and enact this revenge. His daughter wants to come along too. He doesn't want her to, but at the same time, it's like she's been doing all this stuff already for him. She's been the one basically raising herself all this time, and now he wants to, parent. So they have an intriguing dynamic. The daughter just seems to be mute, or when she speaks, all the dialogue bubbles or different symbols and designs. So I don't know if it's just noises or what exactly she is portraying, or some sort of sign language. It's not super clear. I did really like the artwork overall by Mac Chater. I don't know. a lot of his work, to be honest, but I like what I see here, especially when he comes to the facial acting. I really like what he was able to design. A lot of his landscapes are really open. This is a world where it's farm country. This is early civilization, so there's not a lot going on. It's pretty empty. There's this like vast just drabness to it in a way, especially with the coloring. It's just like this brownness overall. Just everything just feels like it's in mud or something like that. There's just the way that the colors are muted. It's very affecting, I think, especially for the mood of the story. But I thought overall that he's got a lot of great storytelling. Especially there's a great scene between the father and the daughter where he's kind of sharpening his sword right before he's getting ready for battle, and kind of the eyes of the daughter play a key role throughout. It's what he really uses to define her and know who she is. But I just felt this was really a strong opening. There isn't a huge amount of story here. As indicated, this is pretty straightforward, trying to seek revenge for what happened to him when he was younger, or what happened to his wife and all of his friends and family, basically. And so when it comes to the general concept, it's rather straightforward. But I think what's going to be the key to this moving forward is the relationship between the daughter and the father and how they interact, which I'm always a huge fan of. Our sucker for great father-daughter sons, or basically anything surrounding parental relationships, especially when there's certainly a big divide between these two. I think that could lead to some compelling storytelling. Another recommendation of the week, this was probably the closest, and it wasn't really till I read Batman 48 that I was, okay, this is definitely going to be the recommendation of the week. It's actually, to me, probably the best Marvel title in this refresh line I've read so far, and that's the Immortal Hulk #1, written by Al Ewing with art by Joe Bennett. And Marvel's been doing a lot of these refresh books. I've actually been enjoying them for the most part. I think Marvel gets a lot of slack, and sometimes it's due to some of the quality of their comics in the sense of the physical quality of it. But I think that they have a lot of good books out there. And I picked up Immortal Hulk because the concept to me seemed really intriguing. Al Ewing having this more horror take on the book. We got a little bit of a hint of what he would be doing with it in the No Surrender storyline, where we saw the first reemergence of Hulk after he was supposedly dead, back from Civil War II, I believe. Although I think he showed up in Secret Empire too, so he didn't stay dead for long. And that's kind of the premise of this, is that Hulk doesn't die, or Bruce Banner or Hulk don't die. It opens up with robbery that goes wrong, that leads to the death of a child at this gas station, along with Bruce Banner. Bruce Banner awakes in this great scene at the morgue, and then goes out and acts justice against the person that killed him and that girl. We find out a little bit more backstory about that criminal as well, why he did what he did. And what I really find really effective about the story so far is the approach that Al Ewing is having with Hulk and Bruce Banner. There are two characters that tend to be approached differently based upon the writer. Sometimes they're looked at as two opposing entities taking up the same space, where they're basically fighting for control, and they're not really connected. Their choices, they're cognitive of the choices of each other, but no way do they influence the choice of each other in major ways. My impression with what Al Ewing is doing is that he sees it differently, where Bruce Banner may actually have more control, or the Hulk may be more of an extension of Bruce Banner than Bruce Banner likes to admit. There is this continuous question that pops up throughout this book about, am I a good person? The reflection of self, basically, where there are these people throughout this book that do some pretty bad and twisted things, but they see themselves as a good person. They can justify their actions for whatever reason. And yeah, we could look at a character that commits a crime like a murder and robbery as obviously a bad person, even if they did it because they have reasons, maybe because they have a family that they're trying to support or what have you. But at the same time, what about someone like Bruce Banner? Is he, in fact, a good person? He does some pretty horrific things in this. They do treat the Hulk very much like that monster. Even the depiction of him, how he's drawn, he's much more primal. He doesn't look like a figure that you would put on the Avengers. He is this force of nature that is just being unleashed. He is smart, though, in the sense this isn't dumb Hulk. This isn't Hulk smash Hulk. He's got a little bit more intelligence to him. He's a little bit more sadistic than I've really seen a Hulk. He seems to take pleasure and smashing or enacting punishment for people that deserve it, like almost like a pseudo Ghost Rider or something of that nature, where he is doing what he feels is right because of what this person did. He has a line he won't cross. I don't know. I find it just really intriguing. There's a lot of questions here that I think could be really compelling, and I think put the Hulk in a cool direction. I've not stayed continuous with a Hulk book really in some time. Really after World War Hulk is the last time I really kept up with a Hulk book. But this can keep me on. I did like the art of Joe Bennett a lot. I really loved how he depicted the Hulk. As I indicated, the way that he looks, like even the way he stands, he's very animalistic in that sense. So I'm curious to see where this goes. My only issue is that regarding that question of control that seems to come up here and there, or the question of, is this person good or truly good? I think he maybe needs to, and this is something that can go on in future issues, better define where that control lies. Like in this case, you have a criminal that is doing things that are possibly out of his control. So does that question of, is he's a good person, is it as poignant when he's kind of in a tough spot? Or if our understanding of Hulk is that he is able to do what he wants and he's not a connection to Bruce Banner, does that question of, is he a good person, are you putting too much blame on the shoulders of Bruce Banner for things he's not really able to impact? Again, that's a question that can be explored. Not necessarily a problem, but I think something that will need to be clarified, or probably where this book will be going moving forward. So this is probably, as I indicated, the best Marvel Refresh book in the sense of it is something very new for the direction of Hulk in some time. There have been other approaches that have treated a Hulk like a horror book, like a monster before, but we haven't really seen it in I can't remember the last time, really. So I don't know if Amadeus Hulk is still around, if that book's still going. I did like that character when he showed up, and I think I remember the Champions or something like that. So I think there's still a place for him, and I think it makes sense if he exists and is doing that more of the Hulk smash type of stories, or more of the low key stories, that you take this book in this direction. So you can actually kind of have both at the same time. Another big Marvel Refresh book that came out this week was Doctor Strange #1 or 391, written by Mark Waid and art by Jesus Saiz. And of all the Marvel Refresh books that were coming out this week, this was the one I was least anticipating. I just wasn't sure what the direction would be with Mark Waid on Doctor Strange, if he would basically have a character that is backtracked and doesn't have the great progression I felt that we had with Jason Aaron and Donny Cates, where I thought that they were able to give Strange a personality that was a little bit more captivating, a little bit more intriguing than he typically is. I always found Strange to be a very standoffish character. Like, he was a character that could show up here and there and work, but isolated by himself, I couldn't really ever get invested in his books, which is why I think he has not had a continuous title all that much until they came around. And I was hoping this wouldn't go back on that. And it does in a way, but I've still actually found this much more intriguing than I ever anticipated. And this is very much an old school book in a lot of ways. He's even pulling out the omniscient narrator that shows up, which is a tool that is barely ever used anymore. It's like the old has become new again. Kind of seeing that usage, it felt like, wow, I missed that. I actually like how he's doing this. I feel like it's getting us into the character of Doctor Strange in a way that is different than what Donny Cates and Jason Aaron did. And, it's kind of some people tend to knock the use of a narrator, but I feel like in this day and age, it can work because it is so rarely seen. And it ended up being a little bit more wordy than your typical Marvel book because of that. So it ends up having a lot more story than some of the other Marvel Fresh Start books. And the premise of this is that, everyone's talking about that Doctor Strange goes into space, and he's been in space before. He is Sorcerer Supreme. He is one of the more powerful characters in the Marvel world. But the reasoning behind it, I didn't know until reading this. And the idea is that he's basically lost a step. He is not the Doctor Strange he once was. He seems to not be able to see magic again or use magic. And it's not a case where like in the early Jason Aaron books where magic was taken from him, it just seems like he's lost it for some reason, almost like he's coming through like a midlife crisis, or, when like the best baseball player who has a great average for some reason just can't hit the ball. Like there's something mentally blocking them, that they're just in a gigantic slump, and Doctor Strange is in a slump, and he feels like he doesn't know what he can do. He even ends up going back to civilian life and kind of restarting, but still has that itch, eventually seeking the help of Tony Stark, who advises him to solve it by finding a new source, revitalizing, who he is. How do you do that? By going out into space. And that's really where it leaves it for the most part. I don't want to obviously get into major spoilers, but I thought the characterization of Strange was interesting. There was like a bit in this, for example, where when he's going off into space, and he makes there's the remark that he doesn't like to drive because driving is the act that took away who he previously was. And I don't know if that's ever been approached before, knowing that he has this aversion to operating vehicles and things like that. Obviously, he's never really had to, being Doctor Strange, but it makes sense, like why he would not want to get behind the wheel of a car, or in this case, a spaceship. And I also have to say the art by Jesus Ciaz, who I don't, again, another artist I'm not super familiar with, to me was, wow, a big part of what worked with this. There was some great, right from the opening, like there was this crazy looking creature, other dimensional being. It looked fantastic. And then we see Strange try to sew up the world using basically kind of your cross stitch, like you would if you're sewing up a body, which may be a little bit too heavy-handed metaphor. It's like, okay, I'm going to do this like a surgeon. All right, maybe that's pushing it a little bit, but I thought the actual depiction of it was rather strong. And it's great seeing actually Doctor Strange like in his old classic getup, because it flashes back and then forward. The other piece is that, we did just see Doctor Strange do something like this previously. We've seen him go through not having any magic. I really like that part of Jason Aaron's run, because it really showed the ingenuity of Doctor Strange. He took away the one thing that defines him, and now he has to find new ways to solve his problems. And I thought within that, we got to really know who Doctor Strange was as a person, outside of just being this guy who would come up with whatever Daisy Ex Machina you needed at that moment in time. Now we had to actually think things through. And even in Donny Cates' run, we saw that too, that questioning of himself. And I think that's the one thing, if you're asking if this is a refresh book, it maybe isn't, in the sense of this is doing a lot of the things story-wise, narrative-wise, that a lot of Marvel books have been doing for some time, taking that hero and taking away what defines them and have them basically be someone else. Some cases literally, in some cases metaphorically. And so I don't know if that might be the right choice, in the sense of if you're trying to do a different direction of the character of Doctor Strange, having a story thematically that falls in line with a lot of what came before. Again, this is only the first issue, so maybe by the second issue this will change, and it was just a tactic to get him into space, because we don't really get that aspect of the story all that much. But as going into this with little expectation of how good it may or may not have been, I walked away relatively happy, and this is one I didn't pull on my weekly or monthly pull list. And if the next issue is as strong, or I like where it's going, I could see myself continuing this for the long haul. So a pleasant surprise for me, as this was probably the one of the refresh books that was lowest on my list, and now it's much more near the top than I anticipated it to be.
One of the books that kind of disappointed me was Deadpool #1 by Scotty Young and art by Scott Klein. And I was going into this with a decent amount of anticipation, so that may be why. But I've enjoyed a lot of what Scotty Young has done as a writer. I Hate Fairyland. I really enjoy his work he did with Wizard of Oz. He had that Rocket Raccoon series previously, so I had some anticipation. I thought he would have a good voice for Deadpool, and I will say, ultimately, that is the case for this issue. And I think that, this does possibly have some, promising aspects to it that could lead to a good series. My biggest issue with it was mostly with the structure of it, and just not understanding the purpose in which it was designed, or what it added to the story. And I felt like in a way it almost detracted and added unnecessary levels of confusion. I thought the opening was great. It was a good cold open where Deadpool is being Deadpool, acting like a jerk in the middle of a movie theater, leads to him taking out some biker gang, and fun ensues. A lot of brutality, a lot of good violence, what you'd want for a Deadpool book, good humor. If you're a Deadpool fan, I pretty much think that depicts what you would want. But then it kind of ends up fluctuating. We get a continuation of that story, and then what felt like nearly halfway through, I guess 2/3 of the way through, it says to be continued. I'm like, oh, okay, well, it's an interesting place to end, but there's a lot of more space in this book. I guess there's maybe a backup story or something like that, which often happens with first issues. But no, it is a backup story, or it is a flashback to what happened beforehand. So we're now seeing the events of everything that led us up to that spot. And it's a little bit, maybe it's a nitpick, but saying to be continued rather than just doing the previously, or it just seemed unnecessary to split it up that way. And then in that piece, it's Deadpool going around trying to create his own more sympathetic origin, taking different bits and pieces from, classic origins and putting the Deadpool spin on it, which I thought was a joke that was effective and worked well, and then seems like it will tie into things moving forward. Was not the hugest fan of the art. I thought it was a little bit inconsistent at times, especially in the depiction of Teenage Sonic Warhead. I can never say her name right, but the character that was in the Deadpool 2 film and Deadpool film, she does show up in this. This is a book that very much is impacted by the movies, and it calls that out. And I know some people might have a problem with that, but if any book should do that, to me it's Deadpool, because if Deadpool is someone who's breaking the fourth wall, it would then make sense to extend that out to his own films and things of that nature and be able to comment on those. So I think it would be a mistake in a way to not extend out his meta commentary to not only his comic book but to his movies as well. If the movie's going to comment on the comics, it should probably work vice versa. But if I know some people hate the idea of cinematic universes impacting the comic book universes, and at this point it's unavoidable. But sometimes I have a problem with it, sometimes I don't. And this, I think it makes sense because I do like the dynamic between Megasonic, Teenage Warhead, and Deadpool. I don't know why she's partnering with him or why she's there. It seems like she would try to get away from him as fast as possible. So I think that's something they need to clarify, to think of, okay, she was basically, in the film there for Deadpool just because she had to be. Here she is very much by choice. So I think they'll need to maybe explore that further to kind of explain why that's happening. Outside of the meta joke of they're doing it because the movie did it. Maybe they won't. Maybe that's the purpose behind it. But I just thought the structure of it was a little bit strange. I did like Scotty Young's letter in the back, which I read sometimes, I don't. But I was intrigued to see, as with Scotty Young, his connection to Deadpool is interesting because my first introduction to him, or my first time noticing his work, was actually the variant covers he did for the Cable and Deadpool way back when. And now he's actually writing Deadpool, so it's been cool to tracking his career, seeing now he's much bigger name in the world of comics. So I thought the humor here was good. It won't work for everyone. I think Deadpool's jokes, they're not as funny to me as they were forever ago when I was younger, but younger, a little bit immature, a little bit more immature today. Now I'm not laughing out loud as much, but I thought the storytelling was good. What I really liked about Jerry Dugan's run is how he was able to add a little bit more weightiness to the character. Scotty Young is basically not doing that, and I guess if you're gonna relaunch Deadpool, and it makes, I guess, the most sense to bring him back to really what made him famous and what made him such a big character. So I think for a lot of people this will work. I don't see anyone who's a huge Deadpool fan not enjoying this at least a little bit. But if you're a person who does not like Deadpool, or maybe like the different direction that was in the previous series, maybe this won't work for you, because it is going back to a more, not simplistic, but a little bit more one-dimensional form, at least with the character of Deadpool so far. Is again only the first issue, so it can build upon here, but we'll see. Also coming out this week, not to be outdone, this was a huge weekend with Marvel and DC. I usually try to mix up more between some of the smaller groups, but they had such big books this week, I felt like I had to take some time to talk about them. And one of the big DC books that came out was Justice League #1 that I did read, and I went into this, I'm talking about anticipation levels, with very low anticipation, because I was not a huge fan of Metal. I started off okay with no justice, but by the end it did lose me. Thought it got overly bloated and just too much plot and not enough character. But I gotta say, Justice League #1, it's, to me, this was better than any book I read in Metal. This was better than any book I read in No Justice. And I think a big reason for that was the way that Scott Snyder did structure it, in the sense of, at the heart of this, I think I have a little bit more to grab onto as a reader personally for what I like, in the sense, this is most of this, nearly all this story, we are told it through the perspective of our Martian Manhunter. He's that anchor to all the craziness that's going on. And I think he's a good anchor to do that, because he's coming from a world in which he has seen everything he knew and loved destroyed, and now he's seeing his new life under that same type of threat, or possible threat. They know something is coming because of the source wall being broken. They just don't know what it is, and if it's here to save us or it's here to destroy us. At the same time, we also have the Lex Luthor and Vandal Savage doing their thing. And it seems like Lex Luthor is going back to being the Lex Luthor we all know and hate, or love to hate, or what have you, which I'm glad for. I know it's weird to see this character that was what became a hero for such a long time go back to being the villain, but I am happy to see heroes be heroes and villains be villains again. I know that there are the other Justice League books that are coming out, so I don't know how much they're going to play a part in this. And this Justice League team, as someone who did love the cartoon growing up in the early 2000s, clearly they're like, okay, people love that. Let's get those characters with Hawkgirl, John Stewart, Green Lantern, Martian Manhunter, Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, basically all the big players that were there for that TV show, cartoon, are here now. So, a little bit nostalgia there for sure. Maybe that's part of why it worked a little bit more for me. But I think overall, this was a really well-structured book. It did cover a lot in looking at, especially the depiction of what Justice League were doing at the same time as we see the Legion doing their thing, or forming the way that they form, and Lex Luthor basically subverting that of Vandal Savage. So I did like the back and forth between those two groups, and I think this is much better focus than what Snyder was doing with some of the other books within Metal and No Justice. A little bit more focused. It wasn't as chaotic, and things didn't just happen just to happen. I felt like the revelations in this were much more story driven than they were in the past. But, like I said, I did like No Justice when it started off, and then it kind of teetered out. But overall, I thought it was a very strong and promising beginning for this new Justice League relaunch. Justice League, to me, since Rebirth, has been one of the biggest disappointing titles. It just hasn't really caught on in an interesting way. But now I feel like they're giving it the attention that it deserves, and giving it the talent that it deserves as well. So I'm still apprehensive about the other Justice League, spin-off books that they're gonna have. We'll see. If they can stay consistent as this, we may have something special. And I don't know. To me, there's just this was a good week for comics in the world of Marvel and DC. A lot of promising books that were starting, and this was near the top for me. Also coming out for DC this week was The Man of Steel #2, as Brian Michael Bendis continues his weekly Superman. I liked the first one well enough. I thought it was a good introduction to Bendis taking over Superman. This second issue, though, it didn't work for me as well. There's some issues about it that are concerning to me. First and foremost, it opens up again with, we see Krypton exploding, and there seems to be a mystery behind if, in fact, that R'Gul, this new character that showed up first in Action Comics 1000, was behind all of it, or what the case may be, or if it's what we always thought. So what I'm kind of confused by is if I'm supposed to think R'Gul did it or he didn't do it. I know he's indicated that he did, so it just seems like it's building a mystery that either has two options. It is, everything is basically what I thought it was before I read this, or it's a mystery that is asking a question that I didn't want answered in the first place, or giving an answer to a question I didn't think needed to be asked. And I don't know, it just seems like a weird way to approach it, to try to force in some of this mystery. And it reminds me a little bit of what Bendis did with Iron Man, where of parentage of Iron Man to be different people. And it seems like there is this motive to want to change the history of a character, change like where the beginnings come from, but at the same time not really change that character in a meaningful way. Like the changing of the parenting for Tony Stark didn't really impact him as a character all that much. It gave him a different backstory, but nothing really came of it. And maybe there were plans, but he never got to it because he left Marvel. But again, it seems like his depiction here of Superman so far is keeping what we know of Superman. Is this going to change anything? I don't know. Like, how could it? Because it's, again, I have a sinking feeling that this actually has to do more with the Guardians of the Green Lantern Corps. And because the Guardians are playing a key role in here, and it seems like maybe they had more to do with this than they're letting on. And perhaps that Krypton being destroyed wasn't actually R'gul is this gigantic red herring, and we find out that perhaps that Green Lanterns had more to do with it than we even know at this point. It's just a hunch I'm having, but I we do see Hal Jordan show up in this, and I'm curious if that is where it's going. There's also this other mystery that's surrounding this book of where Lois Lane is, because she disappeared in the last issue, and I guess what's confusing to me was the structure of this book as well, where we see Superman, he's flying around doing what he's doing, and at one point, though, it flashes back to Lois being, and him and Jonathan seeing this gigantic creature, and then again, it's flung to the present time where Lois is gone. It just was strange. I was having a hard time following where we were in this story. Suddenly we're on the moon, and we see Kent there, and then we're flashing forward to R'gul coming to Earth. It just seems the structure of this is a little bit all over the place, and it's hard to find out what we're supposed to know and what we're not supposed to know, what's a false mystery, what's a real mystery. I'm not sure here. But again, I do like the voice that when we just have the plain old Superman being Superman, I'm liking that. So I'm hoping that once we get this out of the way and we can get to just our normal Superman story, we'll get to, Brian Michael Bendis really making the story his own. The other part of this was that we did have multiple artists on this, and they had very different styles. Like Doc Shaner, who I'm a huge fan of, he had pages 1 through 13. I really liked his style. And then we get Steve Rude, who's to me, very different. And then finishing up with Jay Fabok for the last 2 pages. I know this is a weekly series, so it's a little bit more tough for any artist to keep up with it. But I don't know. It just seems like you had this much time. Why not have one artist on one book and another one on another, or something like that? I just find it when you're changing styles so drastically from one bit to the next, on the top of the fact that you have these bleeding in different storylines at the same time, it leads to a lot of unnecessary confusion. And then everything else is lost in the realm. There's some introduction to new characters. So it's just, I don't know. I felt this has me a little bit concerned. I'm hoping with the next issue, things become a little bit more clear, and we can kind of focus on, what is actually the direction of this Man of Steel series. But, this is 6 issues. There's only issue 2. I don't know. Like I said, there are pieces here I think have potential, but when it comes to the execution of it, at least for this specific issue, it was off for me.
One more Marvel book I wanted to talk about was X-Men Red #5, and this to me continues to be by far the best X-Men title on the shelves. I thought X-Men Blue started off okay, then I really lost track with it when we had all these different crossovers. X-Men Gold, to me, never really found itself. It always felt like a book that was trying to be something else. I didn't really love Astonishing X-Men. I have somewhat hope now that Matthew Rosensberg will be taking that over. But to me, the person that has had the most promising voice that's worked with the X-Men so far in some time has been Tom Taylor. I loved what he did with All New Wolverine. Sad that came to end, but I'm glad that those characters are appearing in X-Men Red. And to me, he just has a fundamental understanding of the X-Men and understands with that, it's not about just trying to repeat what came before, but finding new avenues of taking much of what built the X-Men into what they are and modernizing it for today's world. And with that, I feel like this issue is a great example of how to do that correctly. He has built up, this Cassandra Nova as this main antagonist, and how she's been utilizing her power to
manipulate the minds and getting everyone to hate mutants to an extended level once again. And I felt like in this too, they really showed that, there's ways to fight that hate that are not simply punching and kicking. Jean Grey, to me, is becoming into a character that I can really care about. I've never been a huge Jean Grey fan, but she does feel like an extension to that Professor Xavier in a way, maybe even approaching his dream in a more practical manner than he ever imagined. And I also really love how they're utilizing Namor in this, who I'm still find it kind of odd that he is a mutant. It's still kind of weird to me, but I thought that in this book he actually had a pretty cool moment, and also kind of showcases why having him on the team can be hugely beneficial when you have more of a, have a piece of his kingdom at your back. You have a lot of different ways to approach massive global problems. There is more diplomacy things that you can go after, and something I really didn't consider, especially when we think of how nations have to fly over other countries and get permission. Well, when you're the king of the ocean, that gives you a lot of power, and I'm glad they're approaching that, because that's something I personally haven't really seen before. And again, I just like the combination of these different characters that they're building their voice up, how the message that's here about how people are, I think, at their core good, but can be manipulated by outside forces into doing things they normally wouldn't. And the message here too of just giving people the opportunity to see each other as human. There's a great moment between these soldiers and this Polish country that are trying to kill all these mutants because they've been being manipulated, and Jean Grey utilizes her mental powers to allow them to view each other and see the humanity in one another, and it helps quells the violence. And she then has a great back and forth with Nightcrawler, who questions utilizing that tactic, if it's going too far, if it's trying to change the minds of individuals, or trying to ethically making people do certain things when you have that power. Is that, are you going then down the same route of those people that you're fighting against? And I thought the back and forth between Jean Grey and Nightcrawler was rather poignant in that moment. So I have a lot of hope that this will be the X-Men book that continues. I don't know if they're doing a revamp, if Uncanny X-Men is eventually coming back, but if you're looking for a good X-Men book outside of what could possibly be with Matthew Rosenberg taking over Astonishing X-Men, this to me has been most consistently good and it's most consistently approachable X-Men title by far. So I'm hoping Tom Taylor, if an Uncanny book does start again, that he's the person that's writing it. All right, let's move over to World of Image for Death and Glory #2. And when I read the first Death and Glory #1, I thought, this is a good issue. This is a lot of, not fun necessarily, but it's pretty straightforward for a Rick Remender book. There's no different science fiction aspect to it. It's not taking place in the future. It seems rather almost, unlike a Rick Remender style. Did love the Ben Gale art. There's some great action sequences in the first issue where it seems very kinetic, where that Death or Glory title is coming from. This issue, it does dial it back a little bit, but also I feel like this is where the Remender is starting to show itself a little bit more, specifically a sequence that involves a pepper of some sort that was rather graphic and unexpected. I'm like, is this going? No, he is going all the way there, and I don't want to ruin it, but it was rather surprising. I debated if that's going a little bit too far. I do think it's a little bit unnecessary, but I think that is showing that Remender is going to have his type of outlandishness show itself here and there. And this does, I think, give you a better understanding of where this title is going, where it started as this trying to rob drug dealers. Now it's more of a trafficking issue, and also utilizing immigrants as for their organs, and the brutality in that. There are some pretty brutal scenes in this, so it really up the ante in issue #2. And I'm really liking it. Again, the Ben Gale art is rather solid in this. He can really depict some of those moments. I will say, though, it doesn't get too graphic. There's not a lot of blood and gore. It tends to turn the camera right when things are going to get super, super bad, but you certainly see the effects of it for sure. So I'm really liking this book. It's gotten a good start with these first 2 issues, so it's a good opportunity to jump in. I debated about having this as pick of the week, but I think much of what was the strength of the issue, like I don't think this issue is nearly as strong without reading the first issue that kind of set the stage. I am liking the character of Glory, though. I do like what he's developing with her. So yeah, another solid title from Image and another solid book for Rick Remender. All right, one more book to talk about before we end today's podcast, and that is Isola number 3. And I've been enjoying the series a great deal since it debuted, first and foremost because of the art and specifically the color palette. It seems it's one of the most striking books when it comes to its imagery that I've seen. I remember the first few pages I was reading, I was like, wow, I was blown away. I remember thinking, like, I feel like this is almost a misprint because of how much it jumps off the page. Like, did they accidentally put too much time into this? What's going on? Story wise, I know it's been rather lacking in a sense, where it's really dropping you into this world, not giving you really any exposition whatsoever, and just letting you figure things out. This issue, I feel like we get a little bit more, although we got much more story in this, and I felt like at the end of it, I was more confused than I anticipated. You know, I knew that we didn't understand every aspect of how this world functions, but at the heart of it was really just a story of the soldier trying to get her queen to the safe location. So the surrounding pieces of it not making sense all the way didn't really matter to me, because that wasn't the most important piece of it. It was, and I figured we would learn more as we go. It reminded me very much of a Hayao Miyazaki film, where you start right off and you're like, is this a sequel to a movie I have not seen yet? It seems like we're supposed to going into this with a lot of background knowledge, but you then learn as you go, and by the end of it, everything begins to kind of fall into place. A little different, obviously, with the comic book, because you're dealing with more of a serial, issue by issue storytelling here. This gives us more background, though I'm not 100% much more understanding everything that's going on. I was, by the end, I was like somewhat confused. It did go in a completely unexpected direction for me, and maybe that's why I thought I kind of had an idea of where this was going. And if the final events seem to be true, it completely changes much about this book. So, could be a good thing, could be a bad thing. What still remains is I do find it visually breathtaking, and when it comes to the visual storytelling, it is on point. The narrative, I'm just looking for possibly a little bit more. I could see for a lot of people this not working on an issue-to-issue basis, rather getting the trade, because you probably get more of a full story there. But for me, I'm going to continue with it because I've liked everything I've gotten so far. And I feel like as I continue to go, some of my confusion, which again could be possibly user error, just things I'm not personally picking up, will begin to lighten and I'll bit better kind of understand it as it goes. I do really love the world. I love the creatures. And although this was a little bit more exposition-y at times, I still find that the conversations between the characters rather strong. I do wish, though, that our main character had a little bit more to her, which seems to not have much going on at the moment. That can change, but right now she's really a deer in headlights watching everything happen, and I'm hoping, especially considering what happens at the end of this issue, that we get a little bit more for her moving on. But still, it's a solid recommend and continues to be just a really engaging read, even if it's not getting me everything I want. All right, well, that brings us to the end of today's show. And as always, if you want to interact with the show, there's a tons of ways to do so. I'm on Twitter at MovieRevolt. You can email the show at movierevolt@geekcastradio.com. Also, the show is on Instagram and Facebook. Just search Comic Concierge Podcast. Also, I've been putting a lot of video content on our new YouTube channel that we're trying to revamp and get things out there. So I've been doing reviews of all the Marvel Fresh Start titles, some other books. I'm starting some other series that I feel like might be things people are interested in. Doing long box hauls or doing weekly hauls of all the books I pick up every so often when I go to the comic book store. So if you want to check that out, that's the Geekcast Radio Network on YouTube. I'll put a link in the show notes below as well. But for now, remember that the comics are for everyone. The key is finding the right one. Until next time, thanks for listening.
Left on the soccer field, I would transfer schools before my black eyes healed. There is nothing worse in life than the sight of you. Oh, there is nothing worse in life than the smell of you. Oh, we don't like the way you walk, and we don't like the way you talk, and we don't like the way you dress, and we think searching for her, but she didn't want to be seen. Finally one day a friend of hers called me, said Mama had it sort of rough, she'd been pushed around. One man knock you up, another man knock you down.